On the evening of November 21, 1983, the small English village of Narborough was wrapped in a damp winter quiet. 15-year-old Linda Mann left a friend's house shortly after dark, intending to take a familiar shortcut home along a narrow, unlit path known locally as the footpath. It was a routine walk, less than 10 minutes through farmland and hedgerows, one she'd made many times before. But that night, she never arrived home. When morning came, the stillness of Narborough was broken by a grim discovery. A man on his way to work noticed something lying near the end of the path. It was Linda. She was face down on the ground, partially clothed, her body showing clear signs of sexual assault and strangulation. The rural calm of Leicestershire was shattered in an instant. Police officers sealed off the area and began the slow, methodical work of forensic investigation. The technology of the early 1980s was limited. There was no DNA profiling, no computerized evidence system, only fingerprints, fibers, and blood types. Still, investigators collected every possible sample: hair, soil, traces of semen, and the scarf Linda had been wearing. They photographed the scene in detail, marking tire impressions and footprints leading toward the nearby road. Detective Chief Superintendent David Baker, a veteran investigator known for his composure under pressure, took charge of the case. To him, this was no random act of violence. The secluded location, the lack of witnesses, and the deliberate attempt to hide the body all suggested a careful, calculated offender, someone who knew the area well. Over the next days, police questioned anyone who might have been out that night: farmers, delivery drivers, teenagers walking home. They built a timeline, charting Linda's last known movements, but nothing led them closer to a suspect. Narborough was a quiet community. The idea that one of their own could be responsible was almost unthinkable. The forensic tests yielded a few important facts. The killer's blood type was A, and he was a secretor, meaning his blood type could be identified through other bodily fluids. This detail eliminated a small percentage of potential suspects, but still left hundreds of local men in the possible range. The clue was too broad to narrow the search meaningfully. Police patrols increased. Parents forbade their daughters from walking home alone. The footpath, once a convenient shortcut, became a symbol of danger. The local newspaper printed cautious headlines, urging residents to remain vigilant but calm. Weeks turned into months, and the investigation lost momentum. Without witnesses or physical evidence to connect anyone directly to the crime, detectives could only revisit old leads and hope that time would shake something loose. It didn't. By the following spring, the case had grown cold. For the Mann family, the loss was unbearable. Linda's father later described the pain as living in darkness. The community tried to move forward, but a quiet sense of unease settled over Narborough. The murder was no longer front-page news, yet the fear lingered. Unsolved crimes leave a mark, not only on the victims' families, but on entire towns. And in Narborough, that mark ran deep. The villagers learned to live with caution, avoiding the footpath after dusk, teaching their children to keep to the main roads. But the path was still there, winding through the fields, silent, ordinary, and waiting. Nearly 3 years would pass before the horror returned. Another young girl. Another path. And this time, investigators would begin to see a pattern that would change forensic science forever. It was July 31, 1986, a warm summer evening in the neighboring village of Enderby, just a few miles from Narborough. 15-year-old Dawn Ashworth told her parents she was going to visit a friend. She promised to be home by 9. The sun lingered late that night, stretching long golden shadows across the fields. Dawn never came back. When she didn't return by morning, her family reported her missing. The police response was immediate and intense. Memories of Linda Mann's murder still haunted the force. Patrols were sent out within hours, officers combing the footpaths, hedgerows, and quiet lanes around the village. Everyone feared the worst. 2 days later, a search team made the discovery. In a wooded area near 10-Pound Lane, barely half a mile from her home, they found Dawn's body. The scene was brutally familiar. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled, her body left partially hidden under branches. The similarities to the 1983 killing were undeniable. Detective Chief Superintendent David Baker, who had led the Mann investigation, was called back to take command. To him, this wasn't coincidence. The way the victim had been approached, the choice of location, even the method of killing, it all suggested the same offender had returned after nearly 3 years of silence. The police sealed off the crime scene, and forensic officers began their careful sweep. Advances in forensic collection methods since 1983 meant that samples could be preserved and analyzed more effectively, but DNA profiling still didn't exist in criminal work. They once again relied on blood type analysis and trace comparison. The semen recovered from Dawn's body matched the earlier case, blood group A, secretor. For Baker, this was confirmation. The same men had killed both girls. Word spread quickly through Enderby and the surrounding villages. The sense of fear that had faded over the years returned instantly. Parents refused to let their daughters walk home alone. Newspapers warned of a footpath killer. Detectives went door to door once again, questioning hundreds of men, taking statements, and following up every rumor or alibi. This time, they found someone who drew their attention. A 17-year-old bakery worker named Richard Buckland, who lived in the area and was known to police as a somewhat troubled youth. He had worked near the crime scene, knew the local footpaths, and reportedly made comments about the investigation that raised suspicion. After several interviews, Buckland was brought in for questioning. Under intense interrogation, he made statements that detectives interpreted as a confession. He seemed to know certain details about the crime, where the body was found, how the victim had been assaulted. He even mentioned that he'd seen Dawn that night, though his recollection was inconsistent. To Baker and his team, it looked like a breakthrough. They finally had a suspect who not only fit the psychological profile but had admitted to knowing key information about the case. In September 1986, Richard Buckland was charged with the murder of Dawn Ashworth. But something didn't sit right. Buckland's confession didn't fully align with the evidence. He denied any involvement in the earlier murder of Linda Mann and seemed confused about the sequence of events. Detectives had seen false confessions before, but few were willing to believe it could happen in a case like this. Baker wanted certainty. 2 girls had been murdered, and he needed undeniable proof that the man in custody was the killer, or that someone else was still out there. Within weeks, that uncertainty would lead him to a scientist whose work was about to change the course of criminal investigation forever. In the summer of 1986, the people of Leicestershire believed the police had finally caught the men who had terrorized their villages. 17-year-old Richard Buckland had confessed to the murder of Dawn Ashworth, and his arrest brought a brief, uneasy relief to Narborough and Enderby. After 3 years of uncertainty, it seemed justice was within reach. But within the walls of the Leicestershire Police Headquarters, not everyone was convinced. Detective Chief Superintendent David Baker, who had led both investigations, couldn't ignore a nagging sense of doubt. Buckland's confession didn't fit neatly with the forensic evidence, and his manner was strange, detached, almost rehearsed. During interrogation, Buckland had described details that weren't entirely accurate. He seemed confused about where the attack had happened, and his version of events changed each time he was questioned. He denied killing Linda Mann, even when pressed. For Baker, this inconsistency was unsettling. Could it be that Buckland had committed one murder but not the other? Or had he been pressured into confessing to something he didn't do? Buckland was quiet, socially awkward, and had a mild learning difficulty. Under hours of questioning, he appeared easily led, desperate to please the officers who questioned him. Psychological experts later noted that people with his temperament often confessed to things they didn't understand, especially under stress. But at the time, the police didn't have enough experience with false confessions to see the warning signs. Forensic testing was repeated, comparing samples from both murders. The results were identical. The attacker in each case was blood group A, secretor. This matched about 1/3 of all men in the area, a clue, but not one that proved guilt. Buckland's blood type fit the category, but so did hundreds of others. Baker, still unconvinced, wanted something definitive, something beyond the limits of blood typing. He turned to Dr. Alec Jeffreys, a genetics researcher at the nearby University of Leicester, whose name had recently surfaced in scientific circles. Jeffreys had developed a new technique capable of identifying individuals by analyzing variations in their DNA, a method so new it had never been used in a criminal case before. When Baker approached him, Jeffreys agreed to help. He requested samples from both murder scenes, along with a blood sample from Richard Buckland. The test would take time. This was the 1980s, before modern automation, but the results would be revolutionary. Weeks later, Jeffries called Baker to his lab with the findings. When the test results appeared on photographic film, they revealed a series of dark, banded patterns, a genetic barcode unique to each person. Jeffries compared Buckland's DNA to that of the killer. The result was unmistakable. They did not match. Buckland was innocent. For the first time in history, DNA evidence had exonerated a suspect in a murder case. It proved that the confession was false, and that the real killer, the man responsible for both Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth's deaths, was still out there, living free. When Baker received the news, his relief quickly turned to alarm. The wrong man had nearly been convicted, and worse, the true killer remained in the community. The police would have to start over, but now they had a new tool, one that could finally expose the truth written in blood. The focus shifted from closing a case to finding the men whose DNA matched both murders. For the first time, science was about to lead the hunt. And what came next would become one of the largest, most extraordinary manhunts in British history. The revelation that Richard Buckland was innocent shook Leicestershire police to their core. What had seemed like the end of the investigation had turned into a chilling new beginning. The killer who had murdered Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth was still out there, walking free, unseen, and now aware that the police were looking in the wrong direction. Detective Chief Superintendent David Baker felt the pressure more than anyone. 2 teenage girls were dead, and the public wanted answers. The media, who had once praised the police for capturing Buckland, now questioned how such a mistake could happen. Baker knew that finding the real killer wasn't just about justice anymore, it was about restoring trust. He returned to Dr. Alec Jeffries at the University of Leicester. If DNA could prove Buckland's innocence, it could also identify the real murderer. The samples from both crime scenes had revealed a single genetic profile, a unique fingerprint that belonged to one man. If that pattern could be matched to someone in the community, the case could finally be solved. But there was a problem. In 1986, there was no national DNA database. No quick way to compare profiles. Every man in the region would have to be tested individually. Still, Baker was determined. With Jeffries' guidance, he came up with an unprecedented plan, a mass DNA screening. Posters and leaflets went up across the villages of Narborough, Enderby, and Littlethorpe, calling on all local men between the ages of 17 and 34 to volunteer for a blood or saliva test. The police assured the public it was simply a way to eliminate innocent men and help narrow the search. What followed was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Over the next several months, more than 5,000 men came forward to be tested. They lined up at schools, community centers, and mobile testing units, rolling up their sleeves for a process few understood but most supported. There was a sense of civic duty, and also quiet fear. Dr. Jeffries' lab became the center of an operation that would redefine forensic science. Technicians worked tirelessly, comparing each new DNA sample to the genetic profile from the killer. The work was slow, methodical, and exhausting. But as hundreds of samples came back negative, a sense of frustration began to grow. Months passed, and still no match. The police began to wonder if the killer had slipped through their net, perhaps by moving away, or by refusing to volunteer under false pretenses. The search seemed endless, and morale was fading. Then, one small conversation changed everything. In August 1987, a bakery worker named Ian Kelly was overheard in a pub boasting that he had taken the DNA test on behalf of his co-worker, a man named Colin Pitchfork. The story spread quickly. When questioned, Kelly admitted he'd provided his blood sample, pretending to be Pitchfork, because his friend had asked him to. Pitchfork, he said, didn't want to get mixed up in things. Detectives immediately turned their attention to Colin Pitchfork, a 27-year-old baker and family man from nearby Littlethorpe. He was married with 2 young sons and, on the surface, seemed an ordinary, mild-mannered man. But when police looked deeper, they found troubling details. He had a prior conviction for indecent exposure, and his home was near both crime scenes. He had known the footpaths well. Baker ordered a formal DNA test for Pitchfork. This time, there would be no mistakes, no substitutions. The sample was taken directly, processed carefully, and compared to the genetic profile from the 2 murders. When the results came back, they were unmistakable. Colin Pitchfork's DNA matched the killer's perfectly. After nearly 4 years of fear, error, and heartbreak, the truth had finally surfaced, encoded in blood, revealed by science. When the DNA results confirmed that Colin Pitchfork was the man who had raped and murdered Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth, the investigation reached its turning point. The science was absolute, there was no room for doubt, no ambiguity left to question. It was the first time in history that DNA evidence had been used to both exonerate one man and convict another. Detective Chief Superintendent David Baker knew that everything now hinged on making the arrest quietly and cleanly. Pitchfork was intelligent, cautious, and had already gone to great lengths to avoid detection, even persuading a co-worker to take the DNA test for him. Baker feared that if he suspected anything, he might flee or destroy evidence. On the evening of September 19, 1987, detectives moved in. They found Pitchfork at a local bakery where he worked and asked him to accompany them for questioning. He appeared calm and polite, even helpful, as he was led away. But as the interview began, that composure started to unravel. Confronted with the DNA evidence, Pitchfork realized there was no escape. The scientific proof was irrefutable, and he admitted his guilt. Over the next hours, he gave a chillingly matter-of-fact account of both murders. He said that on the night of November 21, 1983, he had seen Linda Mann walking alone along the footpath near Narborough. Acting on impulse, he parked his car, followed her, and assaulted her. When she screamed, he strangled her to silence her. He left her body by the fence and drove home as if nothing had happened. Nearly 3 years later, he struck again. July 31, 1986. He claimed that he hadn't planned to kill anyone that evening. But when he saw Dawn Ashworth walking along 10-Pound Lane, the same violent urge resurfaced. The attack followed the same brutal pattern, a repetition of his first crime. He left her in the undergrowth and returned home to his wife and children. In the interview, Pitchfork described himself not as a monster but as a man who couldn't help himself. His detached explanation sent chills through the officers listening. He spoke about the crimes as if describing someone else's actions, not his own. When police searched his home, they found nothing remarkable, no trophies, no weapons, nothing to hint at the horror of what he had done. He had hidden in plain sight, a quiet husband, a father, a baker who chatted with neighbors and attended community events. In January 1988, Colin Pitchfork appeared in court at Leicester Crown Court. Facing overwhelming DNA evidence, he pleaded guilty to both murders and to 2 additional charges of sexual assault. The courtroom was silent as the facts were read out. The brutality of the crimes, the innocence of the victims, and the calculated effort to evade justice. The judge described Pitchfork as extremely dangerous and sentenced him to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 30 years. For many, it was a sentence that brought relief, though not closure. The families of Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth had lost far more than justice could return. The case changed the world of criminal investigation forever. The successful use of DNA profiling marked the dawn of a new era in forensic science. What had once been an experimental laboratory technique became an indispensable tool for solving crimes, identifying the guilty, and protecting the innocent. In the years that followed, DNA evidence would solve thousands of cases across the globe, from murders to sexual assaults to wrongful convictions. Every one of them traced its lineage back to a small English village, 2 teenage girls, and a determined detective who refused to settle for doubt. Colin Pitchfork remained in prison for more than 3 decades. His name became synonymous with both evil and innovation, the men whose crimes led to one of the greatest breakthroughs in forensic history. For the people of Narborough and Enderby, the fear that once haunted their footpaths slowly faded, replaced by a quiet pride that justice, though delayed, had finally prevailed. And for the world of science and law enforcement, the footpath murders became more than a tragedy. It became the case that proved that the truth, no matter how long it hides, can always be found in the blood.